Financial leverage is basically a system where you use added money into the equation, money that is not yours, money that you're not putting into the equation to raise your capability of using that money for a certain goal. Okay, so financial leverage from Investopedia is the strategy of using borrowed money, as I said, and then you have the added money into the equation, or that being money that is not yours, you're not putting in the equation. Like you can also mix both, but with the added money, you increase your capability of using that amount for a certain goal. Okay, you can do this through some instruments. Okay, so the leverage concept came from the Archimedes, in which he says, give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to place it, and I shall move the world. Okay, we can see the concept of leverage in our daily basis. The leverage works as a way of increasing your capability of lifting something that loads more, that weighs more, or that you're not capable to pay it right away. In this case of financial leverage, for example. In this case, right here in the picture, we have the fulcrum, we have the load, and then you have the effort needed so you can lift the weight. We can see the example of a car jack in our daily basis, where you can lift a car that weighs a lot. Sometimes you're not able to lift by your own, so a car jack works as a principle applying the leverage system to raise something that loads, that weights greater than you were actually able to raise on your own. A seesaw is also an example of leverage. However, the pivot stays in the middle, so the weights are balanced equally. Okay, the difference is the weight on which on every single side. The concept of leverage, and we can see right here, is the distance that you have in the fulcrum, the weight, and the distance of the arm of the leverage. If you do put the effort needed and you have the same distance to lift the weight, you're going to do the same effort as needed to lift the weight on your own. However, if the distance of the arm of the leverage is longer, you're going to have to do less work to lift the same amount of weight. However, if the distance is longer, you do less effort to lift the weight. However, the distance needed is going to increase. The distance you're going to put in order to lift the weight in this case. So in finances, leverage is a way of amplifying the strength, the force, the input that you put into it to raise a greater amount. And we can use different vehicles to raise your capability of acquiring something, financially speaking, right now. Leverage mechanisms could be in finances could be seen as mortgages, personal loans, and also companies issuing debt. In this case, a firm can simply borrow finance to raise their capital in order to reach a certain goal and then eventually pay people that lended them money. We can see right here as an example where the equity, where within the assets of a company, we have the equity and we have the debt. And that's the concept of financial leverage, where you can increase your capability of acquiring something with greater with less money than you actually have.